Okay, today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Lamed. Today's stuff is sponsored by Rina Bar David in loving memory of Daniel, Natan, Ben Yocheved, and Binyamin. Okay, a few short announcements. Like I said, this is the last day for our Zoom for a month. We'll be back on Zoom in a month. Alana Steinhain's Shiur is going to go up later today, specifically about the main topic of our whole chapter, about Chezkat Shalosh Shanim. She has three interesting interpretations of the Rishonim. So took kind of three Rishonim that you might not be familiar with, so you can learn about them. She's always good at also adding the historical piece, where they're from, a little bit more about them, and three kind of approaches to this concept of, okay, I could prove that I lived there for 3 years, and how does that work, and why does that work? So recommended definite listening to for a good intro to this chapter, which leads me to my next thing, which is because I will not be on Zoom and not be live, and I recorded all the dapim already till I get back. So that means that I won't be announcing every time there's another shiur that goes up. So I recommend either join one of our groups with the links when the links are sent out, or just, if you can also subscribe to the Beyond the Daf podcast, and then it'll come automatically. But I won't be mentioning all the content that's coming up because that hasn't gone up yet. But you should know it all exists. It will be there. It will be continuing, and you should pay attention to what's out there so that you can listen to the shiurim while I'm gone. The extra content. Okay. And just one last final time, in case I know not everybody listens to every class, so maybe you do. But I'll be speaking both in New York on August 19th in Long Island, and I'll be speaking on July 31st in Chicago. So if you want to send it around to people, it's always a good opportunity to bring new people into the learning. So you can pass around information. Well, we can send you flyers for the events if you write to us on email. Okay. Next, we're going to start with our daf now. I'll review the story. We're going to have, basically, it's story day today. We're going to have a lot of cases and a lot of our chapters, stories that actually happened. So we had a case of somebody, and usually this is what's going to be the story, my bayit b'hai beita, or my bayit b'hai karka, which you'll learn those words. We'll do them many times. My bayit, what are you, right? What do you want, or what are you doing? B'hai, on this beit, on this house, or b'hai karka, b'hai ara, on this land. Okay, what are you doing in my house is the story. This is where we ended yesterday. And the person says, what do you mean? I bought it from you, and I've been living here. And always they use this term. Achaltia shnei chazaka. I ate it the years of chazaka. Okay, shnei means the years, which usually means, and we'll talk about this later today, shnei chazaka usually means, and I've been here for 3 years. Which we had two different interpretations, and I'll actually correct some interpretation I said yesterday, which is, according to the one who says, I was living in the inner house, the issue was, I didn't clarify this well enough yesterday, the issue is that when the person who is the original owner says, I was living in the inner house, and I walked by your house every day, in other words, to get out of my inner house, I had to pass through your outer house, and what more proof that I'm protesting by the fact that I walk through your house every single day? And if I walk through your house every day, that means I'm the owner here because I didn't ask you permission every day. And I basically showed I'm in charge here. To which, when they gave before Rav Nachman, and he said, Zil burachilatcha, the person who's living in the house, the possessor, has to prove ownership. And what does that mean? So they have to prove, in this case, and I didn't say this right yesterday, what he would have to prove if that was the case, because again, there's two interpretations, but we'll just stick with this one for today. He would have to prove that the person actually not necessarily lived in the inner house, that we kind of know, that's more a fact, but would have to prove that the person actually walked out a different exit every day. And we're not saying prove he didn't live there, but prove that he left a different way and didn't walk through your house every day. And if you can prove that he didn't walk through your house every day, or it doesn't even have to be every day, but didn't walk through your house often, then that would prove that there was no protesting. And so basically, the main point is the burden of the proof is on the person living in the house right now, who has presumptive ownership, the possessor. Amarle Rava, hachidina? What, you think that's the law? No way. The person, this is actually the first interpretation of Alana in her shiur that you'll listen to, says that part of the whole, I think it was the first, I'm not sure, but one of them is that while it sounds kind of strange, okay, I'm living there for 3 years, squatter, I could prove it, but theoretically, we always, that's a very strong thing in Jewish law. You're a possessor. If you, right, certainly in metaltalin, we say if it's in your house, that basically proves it's yours. So likewise, if you've been eating the produce for 3 years and no one's protested, right, you have this proof of ownership right there. So if the person claims they protested and there's a debate about it, well, they have to prove it because you're possessing the land. So the possessor is in a position of strength. To which the Gemara says, and we're almost getting to our daf, Rami de Rava de Rava, Rami de Rav Nachman de Rav Nachman. And they contradict what they say somewhere else. How so? Exactly a contradiction, but we'll see why they think it. For that, I have a chart that I put up on the board on the whiteboard in Zoom. You'll see it in a minute. Well, there was a different case where somebody said to his friend, so said, I'm selling you all the land that I bought from Bey Bar Sisin. Okay, I'm selling you all the Bey Bar Sisin property that I own. Okay, which basically means, so let's say I'm selling to you, and I say I'm selling you everything that I bought from this other family, selling it to you. Okay, that was the beginning of the case. The problem is that well, in addition to this land that I recently, let's say, or sometime purchased from Bey Bar Sisin that I was now selling to you, and I just kind of clumped it all together and I said all the land that's Bey Bar Sisin, but I actually had other land that was called Bey Bar Sisin that maybe I inherited from my father who bought it from Bey Bar Sisin years ago, or it's called Bey Bar Sisin, but I wasn't including that in my words. So you can see why this is incredibly confusing, right? Why did I use that language if I wasn't including it? But I'm claiming now that I didn't mean that. So Amar le Hai La Bey Bar Sisin he v'kriyei namihu de mikriyei Bey Bar Sisin, right? So basically that was my claim. This is not Bey Bar Sisin. It's just called Bey Bar Sisin, but it's not what I meant. So they go before Rav Nachman to figure out what to do. You know, the other guy says, what do you mean? You sold me all your Bey Bar Sisin land. This is called Bey Bar Sisin. And I say, what are you talking about? That wasn't what I meant. I wasn't including that part. That's a different Bey Bar Sisin land. So they come before Rav Nachman, Uchme biyada de lokach. Now here comes the contradiction, although again, it's a little trickier to see, but I'm not sure the whiteboard is going to do such justice to it, but I'll pull it up and you'll see. But basically, Rav Nachman says, we're going to give it to the buyer. Now, the buyer is not the original owner, right? The buyer is the new person coming in. And in Rav Nachman, in the previous case, he said, the person living there now, the second person needs to do it, right? So you could kind of say like this, right? This is number one, original owner. How do I do this? Where's the pencil here? This is owner number one, and this is owner number two, right? That's how you could say. So basically the house case, he says it goes to the original owner, and the Bey Bar Sisin case, it goes to the buyer. And Rava is going to say the exact opposite. Amale Rava, Dina Hachi, what are you talking about? Hamotzi mechaveru alav haraya. Now, in Rava's case, we're going to say, now it's interesting because Rava actually says the exact same thing. So to say it contradicts is a little tricky. But basically, we're going to say that Rava also contradicts himself because what he says here is the same law, which is the burden of proof is on the person who's, right, who doesn't have the land in their possession right now. Now, who is that in this case? The seller, right? Because, I'm sorry, the seller is the one in the position of strength because the land hasn't yet gone to the buyer. So that's why the seller is the one who wins the case. Okay, what I put in the chart here is who won the case, basically, or who the burden of proof is on the other. So Rava basically says, in the first case, he says the one who's stronger is the one who's living in the land now, the second person. Whereas in the seller and the buyer case, it's the original owner. So that's why they seem to be flipped. But the Gemara is going to say no. Don't compare these the way you compare them. That's not a proper comparison. Kasha de Rava, Kasha de Rav Nachman, de Rav Nachman. So first they just put it out there that this contradicts, right? Basically, we're going to say, right, these seem to be the same, and these seem to be the same, right? That's basically where we're getting at. So now, de Rava lo kasha. No, actually, there's no contradiction with Rava. That's the simplest because hata mocher kai b'nichse, haka lokach kai b'nichse. It's not a matter of who is the original and who's the new one. It's all about who is the machzik of the land. Both these cases, the seller in the second case is the one who still has the property in his possession. And in the first case, the one who's living in the land is the one who's the possessor. So basically, either which way, it's the possessor. So according to Rava, we have a consistent approach within the two. Rav Nachman, it's going to be a little different. Each one's going to kind of have a different reason. Rav Nachman under Rav Nachman Navi Lo Kashya. Why? Because in the Bar Sisin case, now if you had to say this Bar Sisin case, you probably would have said logically you would side with the Lokachim. Why? Rav Nachman says very simply, Kevan da Amarle debe Bar Sisin, umikriya debe Bar Sisin, since the seller said, I'm selling you all the Bei Bar Sisin, and this land is called Bei Bar Sisin. Right? It's basically on the seller to then prove that when the seller said Bei Bar Sisin, he didn't mean this property. Because really, logic would state that if you said Bei Bar Sisin, it should include anything of your land. It was Bei Bar Sisin. Aval hacha, but in our case, where the person's living in the house and the other person said, well, I protested. Now here, why is the ma'arer going to have to prove? Why is the possessor going to have to prove? Because hacha lo yehe ela denakit shtara. Now, basically what we're going to say is like this. You come knock at my door and say, what are you doing in my house? And in this case, I said, well, I've been living here for 3 years. Let's say I said, here's my document that I bought the house. Okay. You would think, right, that's great proof, but it's not full proof. Why? Maybe it's a forged document. So if I pull out a shtar, what would I have to do? Wouldn't we say to you, go validate your shtar, go ratify it in the court and have the court validate it? And if you can have the court validate it, then of course you could stay there. So what do you see here? That even if I had a shtar, I would still have to prove it, that I was the owner. I would have to go to court and prove it. So if my claim is, I've been living here for 3 years and no one protested, I have to prove that. Not only by proving that I was there for 3 years, but I'd have to prove that you didn't protest. Now you claim, again, according to the interpretation we're going with right now, you've been walking through my house every day. So I would have to prove that you're not walking through my house every day protesting. And without that, it's no good. And that's because it's no different than a shtar. So even though, right, Rava says, he says, well, not really, because you're not fully, you are living in it, but it's not enough. Because even if I had a shtar to prove it, I would have to prove it. So basically, we see that they don't contradict. This other case doesn't contradict. Either it's the exact same thing, which Rava, because both cases, it's just a matter, whoever's possessing it right now is in a position of strength, and in each case, it's a different person. Or according to Rav Nachman, each case here just has different unique issue. One is Bei Bar Sisin. You said Bei Bar Sisin, obviously you must have meant even the thing that's called Bei Bar Sisin. If not, go prove it. And with the other case, it's no different than a shtar, that the burden of proof is on you, on the possessor. Okay, in other words, again, the possessor has a certain amount of solid ground, but not enough. You would still have to prove something basic in court. So basically, they'd have to prove, again, I've been living here for 3 years and no one protested. Usually it's not so hard to prove no one protested unless someone claims I did protest, and then the burden of proof is on you, and that's what this case was. Another case. My bayit b'hai beita. Okay, again, same language. What are you doing in my house? Amarle, again, same language. Minach sevante v'chalti shnei chazak. Okay, I've been, right, I bought it from you, and I've been living here for 3 years. Amarle, and right, which implies, and no one protested. To which the original owner says, I had a reason for not protesting. Amarle b'shuke b'arai hava. So I was living far away. Okay. I was, and not only that, right? I was on a very long, prolonged business trip. Okay? I was dealing with the shuk. I was in a faraway shuk, and I was dealing with my business. To which, so basically, it sounds like the original owner saying, I've been gone for 3 years. Amarle v'ha'itli sa'ade dechoshata hava'ate taltin Yomi. So now he says, what do you mean? I have proof that every year you come home for 30 days and you're in town and you didn't protest. They're proof in the pudding. Amarle taltin Yomi b'shukai havatritna. Every time I came home, I was busy in the market. In other words, I do business abroad. I come home, I do my business here and go back. I didn't go home. I didn't go see my property. I didn't go see that you were living there. That's the first commentary of the Rashbam. Okay, the Rashbam understands here that basically, right, I didn't know you were living in my house because I didn't go to the residential area. Okay, I was only in the shuk. I wasn't in the residential area. I didn't see that you were living in my house. Okay, now, Where was he sleeping, right? Again, maybe he had two houses, it's not right, but whatever. His main point was the second option that Rashban brings. If you look at the very last line of the Rashban here, Lo haya li pnai limchot af al pi sheyadati. That's a fascinating commentary. And the Rashbam says, Eino nireh be'enai. I don't think this is a good answer, good explanation, but I want to read it anyway. What he says is, and I relate to this, which is, I didn't have time to deal with it. I knew you were living there. I was just busy in the shuk and I didn't have time to protest. This is a great question, whether you take this commentary or not, because if you take this commentary and you're going to see that they're going to side with him, okay? So maybe I'll just read the case, okay? So then he says basically, I didn't have time to protest when I was here for those 30 days. Either I didn't see you were living there, or I saw you were living, but I was so busy with my work that I didn't have a chance. And I'm a Rava, we're going to see Rava in all these cases. I'm a Rava, avid inish to hold halt in Yomi tari b'shuka. This definitely could be that the 30 days he comes to town, he's too busy, very busy with his work. And it's very likely that, again, depending on the commentary you choose, that he either didn't see the person was living in his house, right, didn't even bother to go check on his properties, or that he saw but was too busy to deal with it. Now, it's a fascinating thing to say. It's one thing to say you didn't see and you weren't, expected to go look. Like, who would have thought someone was living in my land? Although you could assume if you weren't around for a year, it would be a good idea to check on your properties, that no one's squatting on your land. But the other one is more fascinating, I think, because lots of times we don't get to things because we're busy. And usually we can't really use it as an excuse, right? It happens to me all the time with warranties. Something breaks and I just don't deal with it. And then I actually have this crack in my wall right now that I'm trying to deal with. I had someone do some work like almost 2 years ago. And I'm thinking I don't know if it's still guaranteed anyway, and whether it'll be fixed. So I've been pushing off calling, and I'm thinking the more I wait, the more chances are that, the guy's going to say, no way, no how, it's too long has passed. And it's very often that we just get too busy, we don't deal with things. And the question is, right, certainly in this case, if I tell him, listen, it's been here for a year and I just didn't call you, there's no way he's going to, say, oh, well, then I'll deal with it. So anyway, it's an interesting thing. And I like the way the Rashbam jumps and says, no, that's not realistic. I can't imagine they would accept that kind of a claim, which makes a lot of sense. Okay, so basically, Rava sides with the original owner and says, you're right. You didn't protest for a legitimate reason. We count this as a legitimate reason, and therefore the person can't claim, the possessor has no rights. Now we're going to have a whole slew of cases. The next 4 cases, which are going to take us to the end of the dot, are different variations of this kind of issue. So we'll use names and characters, and we'll go back to the Ruth, Naomi, and David triangle. So we have a case where David's the original owner of land, and Ruth is living in the land right now. So David comes knocking on the door and says, my bayit b'hai ara, what are you doing in my land? Okay, this is not a house, so it's land, but Ruth is working in the field. What are you doing in my field? Amalemi planya zavanta. I bought it from Naomi. De Amarli de Zavna Mine. Now, Naomi said she bought it from you. Now, this is Naomi's word that she purchased it from David. And David says, what are you talking about? It's my land. I never sold it to Naomi. So Amarle, David says to Ruth, At lav kamodif, are you not admitting to me? Moving now to Amubet, de hai ara didihi, va'at lo zvante minai. Now, in your words, what I hear are that you're admitting I'm the original owner, and you're admitting that you didn't buy it from me. And I'm claiming that Naomi stole it, and you don't have any proof that Naomi bought it from me. So basically, in the absence of proof, so let's just go back to what is required to do Shnei Chazakah. You need to have lived there for 3 years with no protest. And in addition, though, you have to have a claim of how it got to your possession. Now, she has a claim, Ruth. She says, I bought it from Naomi, who bought it from you, David. But that's not a real claim, because her claim is based on no facts. There is no proof. If she said, I bought it from you, David, that would be sufficient, because she has a claim. She doesn't have proof, but she's been living there for 3 years and David hasn't protested. And David was the original owner of the land. But if she says, I bought it from someone who we have no proof whatsoever that they even own the land, that doesn't prove anything. That's not a claim. That's not, even if, right, again, when Ruth says I bought it from David, she can't prove that either. But the fact that she's been living there and all that, David was the original owner and everyone knows that. But if she says I bought it from someone who we have no proof that she even bought it, and Ruth has no way of knowing. She didn't check out that, right? And that wasn't smart, right? When we buy a house, we check to make sure that the person we're buying from is actually the real owner, but she didn't do that. So in absence of that, she is missing the ta'ana. She's missing the claim of how the land got to my possession. She has it, but it's not a valid one. So it comes up otherwise elsewhere that, and the Rashbam quotes it here, that if she said, mi plan, it's toward the very end of this very long Rashbam, the first Rashbam on the page is very long. If she had it for 3 years, b'ta'in, and she claimed, mi plan yezevante, I bought it from Naomi, dizavna minech kamai didi, who bought it from you in front of me. In other words, if Ruth says, I saw Naomi buy it from you, I was there when she bought it, that would be a different story. That would be accepted. But if her evidence that Naomi was the owner is just from Naomi alone, that's no proof of anything. So basically, she's missing a claim. And therefore, David continues and says to her, Zil, go, leave this property, because lav bal dvarim didi'ah. You have nothing to do with me. In other words, you have no claim against me, and therefore you have nothing to do with this land, and get off my property. And Amar Rava, Dina Ka'amarle. Okay, like I said, Rava is going to be the one to rule in all these cases. Rava says the original owner has the right to kick Ruth off the land. Now we're going to have 3 different variations of this case. The next 2 are very similar with some sort of counterclaim that Ruth is going to make. And the question is her counterclaim going to be accepted? The answer is no, but we'll see. So it's going to start out the exact same way. What are you doing in my land? David says to Ruth, what are you doing here? Amarle, she says to him, Mi plan Yetzavanta, I bought it from Naomi. And I've been living here 3 years. Okay, so far the same. Amarle, Planya Gazlanahu. So David says, Naomi stole it from me, get off my land. Amarle, so Ruth says back this time. But you know what? I can produce witnesses. There's missing a vav here. That's what that note says. Before I was going to buy the land, I asked you, I went to you, David, and I said, do you think I should buy this land? And what did you say to me? And I have witnesses to this conversation. Ve'amartli zil zabin. And you told me, go buy it. Now, if it was stolen property from you, you never would have recommended I buy this land. You would have stopped me right then and there and said, oh, what are you talking about? Why would you buy Naomi's property? She stole it from me. It's my land. But you didn't say that. You said, yeah, Ruth, you should go buy that land. So is that not proof that you're lying to me right now? Amarle, he says, no, that was fair and square that I said that even though it was my land, I had a motivation for saying that. What was my motive? Hasheni noachli, harishon kasheh himenu. Why? Because I preferred that the land be in your possession and not Naomi's. Because you're much easier to deal with than Naomi. Naomi's a tough cookie, and I'm never going to get anywhere with her. Or maybe she has hotshot lawyers, and there's no way I'll get my land back from them. But you, Ruth, I could get it from you much more easily. So I wanted you to buy it so that then I could go to you and say, give me my land back, which is what I'm doing right now. So Amar Rava, Dina Ka'amarle. So Rava says, David has the right here. Okay, David can claim. In other words, the main point is, again, Ruth doesn't have a ta'ana. She doesn't have a good claim. She doesn't have a way to prove it was Naomi's. She tried by bringing witnesses, but that interaction didn't prove anything because David has an explanation for why he did that, even though he's still the rightful owner, and therefore his explanation is acceptable. Or not therefore. Since Rava thinks his explanation is an acceptable explanation as to why he said that, Arishon kashem menu, right? Sheni nochli, Arishon kashem menu. That's a legitimate claim. Therefore, we believe David. Now the Gemara, before we get to our next case, and a bit of a variation on this one, says Kiman ka'admon. Wait, is this ruling of Rava, is it just like Admon and not like the rabbis? Because let's see a similar case. Ditnan. It says in a Mishnah. Okay, it's according to here, it says it's in Ketubot. Ha'orel al hasadeh v'chatum alav be'ed. Let's go back to our case. So Ruth has a signed contract with Naomi, not like our case where she's proving Shnei Chazaka. She has a signed contract with Naomi about the land. And then David comes along and says, that land is mine. But there's one other evidence here, one other piece of evidence, which is David is signed on the contract between Ruth and Naomi. He signed on a deed of sale about land that he's now claiming was stolen from him. So that doesn't weaken his claim at all, because he could have signed on the document, because again, he wanted Ruth to get the land because he wanted to get it away from Naomi so he could fight with Ruth about it, thinking he would beat Ruth, but he wouldn't beat Naomi. So that's fair and square. Now that matches Rava perfectly. That's Admon. Chachamim say, come on, you signed on a contract saying that the sale is going through, basically saying this is a valid sale, and now you're saying it's not a valid sale. We don't accept your claim at this point because you signed on a contract. Okay, so you signed on a bill of sale, there's no way. So now that sounds like Rava wouldn't agree with the rabbis. And that's always a bit of a weakness, because we always assume you're going to go by the mainstream opinion and not when there's an individual arguing with the rabbis. To which the Gemara says no. Afilu tema Rabbanan. You can distinguish between our case, where there was this conversation, right, where basically David suggested, right, advised Ruth to buy the land, versus David being signed on a contract where Ruth bought the land from Naomi. So afilu tema Rabbanan, you could still say the rabbis would agree in our case, because they're not going to believe David because hatam avid le'maaseh. He did an action, he signed on a contract. That's a very formal act. You wouldn't do that if you really owned the land. That would be silly, because that's just giving further evidence that it's not your land. Ba'aval hacha, dibura. Here it was just some words. Words are always considered less significant than actions. And avid inish to mikre ba'amar. People often just say things, and they know that they're not going to necessarily be held to it the way they are with an action, and it's much easier to then explain your words in a particular manner than it is to explain why you signed on a contract when you claim you're the original owner. So therefore, Rava's psak can even go according to the rabbi's position. Case number 3, variation 3, or version 3. What are you doing in my land? Ruth says, I bought it from Naomi, same exact thing. I've been living here for 3 years, or eating the produce from the land for 3 years. So David says, Naomi stole it from me. I have witnesses that you came at night. Okay, it doesn't matter if it was at night, it was just what happened to be the details of this case. And here there's some different versions. We'll go with the Rashbam. Zil zav nanihle. Okay, go out and buy this land from me. Okay, you told me to go buy the land from Naomi. Okay, I added the word zeal. That's based on the Rashbam and many other commentaries, a lot of the manuscripts also. Some people say it's zav nanihle just means after Ruth bought it, David asked to buy it from Ruth. Okay, either which way, it shows that David had an interest in buying this property, which again seems to prove David's not the original owner, because why would he want property? Why would he want to buy property that was his own property? But you might already be thinking this. There could be reason. Amina Esben Dinai. He said, oh, well, the reason I said that was because I thought I would buy my rights back. In other words, it's my land. I thought it's easier to buy it than it is to go to court sometimes, right? Court in general takes time, takes money. Now, you have to say that he wasn't really buying it for the actual value of the, by the way, he didn't buy it in the end, okay? He just told Ruth, please sell it to me or go buy it for me. But in the end, Ruth bought it for herself, okay? She didn't buy it for him, or she didn't sell it to him in the second version. But the point is, you can even read in the Rashbam, Amarti b'libi, okay? I'm in the Rashbam starting with the words, Amina lemizbandina, okay? Let's explain what that means. Amarti b'libi, I said to myself, right in my heart, I'd rather spend a small amount of money and get my land back. Now, why you thought he was going to be able to buy it for a small amount of money, I don't really know. But somehow you'd have to say that, otherwise it would be hard pressed to say he's going to go pay the entire value of the money for the land that's his. But basically what he's trying to say is, and notice no money changed hands anyway. He never said how much money he was going to pay for it. So he's claiming, I was hoping to buy it back by a small amount of money and get my land back rather than have to bother to go to court. Many people would rather avoid court at all costs. So, right, almost like a plea bargain kind of thing, right? I thought that this was a good way to do it. And therefore, the fact that I said that to you doesn't prove I'm not the original owner. And as with all the other cases, I'm a Rava, Avid Inish Dezavindina. Yes, people are willing to pay to settle, and therefore you could understand this, that maybe he was just paying to get his land back rather than go to court. Fourth case. Now, this is similar because there's something perhaps a theft here, but where it's a bit different than the rest of the cases. Okay, it's case number 4 in this set, and it's our last case for today, but it's got a bit of a different details to it. My bayit b'hai ama. So David says to Ruth, what are you doing in this land? Amarle, mi planya zavanta v'achati ashnei chazaka. I bought it from Naomi, and I've been eating here for 3 years. Amarle, v'haniki nashtara dizamna lemine ha'alba shnei. So David says, you claim you've been here shnei chazaka. Now, what does shnei chazaka mean? 3 years usually, right? You say I've been here enough years to prove chazaka, which means 3. Well, I bought the land from Naomi 4 years ago, and I have a document to prove it. I kept my document. So here's my document that says I own this land from 4 years ago. And you're claiming you only moved in at 3, which means that basically Naomi sold you stolen land. It's a little different. It's not that Naomi, well, it's sort of the same, because in the end, what he's saying is Naomi sold me the land first. Okay. And in all the other cases, David was the original owner. In this case, Naomi was the original owner, but sold it to David 4 years ago, and then sold it again, which basically means stolen property, because she's selling land that's not her own to sell, sold it to Ruth, according to Ruth's claim. So David says, well, that's a claim that's not a legitimate claim because it wasn't in Naomi's possession 4 years ago, and here's the proof. I have a document to show for it. But Amrle, Ruth says, Misaval shnei chazaka tlat shnei kamina. When I said I was living here for shnei chazaka, the years of chazaka, you thought I meant 3 years. But shnei chazaka tuva kamina, I meant I've been living here for many, many years, meaning I got here before your star. Your star is a forgery because I bought it from Naomi however many years ago. Okay, I don't want to say a number because we're going to get into numbers in a minute, but let's say 7 years ago. Okay, and that's the number they're going to give in a minute. But let's say she says, right, I've been here 5 years, I've been here 6 years, I've been here 7 years, whatever it is, it was before your document. So your document is actually, you are claiming that the land was yours when you bought it from someone who wasn't the rightful owner, okay, because she had already sold it to me before that. So I'm a Rava. In this case, Rava is actually going to side with the possessor. The only case he sides with the possessor. I'm a Rava. Avide inashe dekaru l'shnei tuva shnei chazaka. Ruth's claim that when I said I've been living there for the years of chazaka means more than 3 is valid. Because people just say shnei chazaka, which could mean 3, it could mean more than 3. It just means I have enough years to prove that I'm a possessor. But the Gemara has a certain modification here, or qualification, and says hanimile da'achla shev. But it only works not if Ruth says 5, not if Ruth says 6, only if Ruth says 7 years. She has to say I've been here 7 years. Why? Dikadim chazaka lahai shtar daha. She has to have had first created a chazaka and had 3 years before David's alleged sale. Okay, David's purchasing of the land. Why? Aval she, because if it was 6 years, if Ruth says, I was living there 6 years. So year 1, I lived there, nothing happened. Because the whole point is you have to prove chazaka without protest. Now, even though no one protested the last 3 years, that's irrelevant because David claims I bought the land. Now, if David's claim to have bought the land is legitimate, then Ruth has no chazaka on the last 3 years. So what does she need to do? She needs to create a chazaka on the first 3 years first to prove that when he has the star is invalid because Ruth doesn't have a document that she bought it 7 years ago. So if it was 6 years, what would happen? Year 1, she's living there, nothing happens. Year 2, she's living there, nothing happens. Year 3, which is 4 years ago from now, Naomi sells the property to David. Now, what is that if not a protest? If Ruth doesn't have a shtar and she's trying to create a chazaka here, so what's a chazaka? A chazaka means, right, I'm living in the land and no one's complaining. Now, if the original owner sells the land to somebody else, she's basically saying, it's not yours to have. I'm selling it because it's my land. That is the biggest protest there could be. So let's just go back. If Ruth is living there 6 years, then in the 3rd year, there's a protest. And therefore, that would mean the sale to David is valid, which means that anything that happened after that is irrelevant because it's stolen property. And then Ruth turns into, this is why it's like the previous cases, like someone who's living in stolen property. And her claim to the land that I bought it from Naomi is irrelevant because Naomi wasn't the owner. So it would only work in the case where Ruth could create a chazaka before David bought it. Then she'd be able to prove that David is not the rightful owner and that therefore she's the owner. So that's the end of today's daf. What we saw today was a lot of interesting cases. We started with this contradiction between these two cases where Rava and Rav Nachman, we thought were saying different things, but really they were saying either the same thing or, right, according to Rava, it's the same basic principle. It's just in each case, it's a different person who's the possessor, who, is considered the one whose the land is in their name. One case it's the possessor, and the other it's the seller. And Rav Nachman, just each case was a different case. The Bey Bar Sisan, you said Bey Bar Sisan, we're going to assume you meant Bey Bar Sisan. And therefore, until you can prove otherwise, it's not the case. And in the case of the possessor, the one living in the land, so just like they would have to prove a shtar, they would have to prove here there was no protest. Then we got to and by the way, I wanted to address, because Terry, you were written at the time, I just caught in the chat, but after, so I want to go back to it. You had said the person should have brought witnesses that they protested, but here again, they just thought it was a natural protest. It wasn't like they were doing an actual protest. They just walked through the property every day, so they didn't think they needed to prove that because they just walked through. It wasn't like I'm lodging an official protest. It's my whole existence and everyday actions are just proving that I obviously don't think that you're the owner. So this is a different sort of protest. It wasn't like an active protest. It was a inherent in my daily actions was walking through your property and basically showing ownership, to which the other guy claims you didn't even do that, right? Anyway, again, it's a little hard to fathom whether if they walk through every day, is there a way to prove they did it? It's a little bit weird, and that's why there's different interpretations of what exactly it means, because hard to imagine they were living in the inner house, and I don't know, it's a little bit of a hard case to understand. Okay, then we got to case number 2, which was the guy was living far away and therefore didn't protest. And when he did come back to town, he was busy with his work dealings, and we actually let that go. Okay, we accepted that as a claim, which again raised some interesting questions. What, just because you're busy with work, you can, claim I didn't get to things, again, depending on which interpretation you take there. Then we get to the next series of 4 cases where basically, does the possessor have a claim when their claim was I bought it from someone who bought it from the original owner? And the original owner claims it was stolen, and there's no proof that it was actually purchased by the middle person. So, do we accept their claim or not? And in most of the cases, we actually ruled with the original owner, who is the one who claims it was stolen from them. The last case, it's not that we don't, it's just that in the last case, it's unclear who was stolen, right? One of them had bought from someone who stole it. It's just not clear which one. And, okay. Anyway, those are our interesting cases for today. We'll stop here. And for those who I'm used to seeing every day, I will see you in about a month. And for everyone else who's listening, so because Shiurim will continue as usual. And just to make a point, so everything will go up at 5 in the morning. On Fridays, the next Shiur will go up by 5:30. And then on Tisha B'Av also, Erev Tisha B'Av, I'll put up, I said that both Shiurim will go up in the morning, also at 5 and 5:30 like Friday, so that people can learn before Tisha B'Av, because it's customary not to learn Tisha B'Av. And remember to check the extra content for what other extra shiurim will be coming in, so that you can delve more in depth than we get to do in class. Wishing everyone a good day.